Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. It is delightful to be here with you this evening, in particular, chatting about menopause and the exactly what it is and what options do you have around it. Is this something you can say no to? And I'm very grateful that I am joined this evening by Dr. Betty Murray, who is a wonderful friend of the family and an expert in this space. Bonjour, Madele. How are you?
Bonjour. Bonjour. I'm good.
Good. Well, I'm delighted to have you here. For those our frequent offenders in the audience, you might recognize Dr. Betty from some of our She Summits. Wonderfully, you show up on our expert panels there. So I'm so grateful that we get to dive into tonight's content matter with you.
I am. I'm excited to be here because this is my favorite subject.
Yeah, yeah. And audience, just you're in for a treat insofar as when she says it's her favorite subject, what she really means is she wears glasses during the day and she collects all this really powerful information. Oh, she's putting on her glasses. She's gonna be
Hold
nerd
on
squad.
one minute. Oh,
Yes.
they are a little dusty. Hold on. There we go. Ah, woo.
She
Oh
so
my
she
goodness.
is part of the nerd squad. And so when we say she has little tidbits, she has really insightful scientific facts that are going to empower you to make better decisions and to know the decisions you can make when it comes to navigating menopause. Yeah, so before we dive in, audience, one thing I think that's really important for us to understand is how old are you? So, menopause is typically, traditionally, something that we would really think about, maybe in the mid 40s, but definitely late 40s, early 50s. And we're starting to see that age creep down a little bit. Clinically, we're starting to see perimenopause coming down. And so, audience, it's really important to us to understand how old you are and what stages you might be at. So please toss that information into the chat. Only myself and Dr. Betty and our wonderful webinar team is able to see that. So for those that are a little bashful about it, no one else is going to be seeing that information. All right. And I'm seeing an age range here. We have some people who are postmenopausal. We have some people who are mid 40s and have started that journey. We're seeing a lot within that kind of mid 40s to 60 range. Yeah. Yeah. And so, oh,
All right.
there we go.
There we go.
There's the sound too. I hear it
Is that
better.
better now? Okay. I was getting ready to whip out my Yeti microphone, but if we're good, we're good. There.
We're good. Audience, you can hear Betty okay? I'm gonna take this. Yeah. All right. Excellent. Much better. Amazing. So audience, for awareness, Betty and I are going to chat for about 30 minutes. We're going to do 30 minutes of Q&A and we're still going to end at our typical time of 7:30 this evening. All right. So, Dr. Murray, where shall we
Yeah.
start in the delight that is menopause and this thing that for good and for founded and unfounded reason, people get very scared about. Let's talk about menopause.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to define it, so we make sure that
Mm,
everybody's kind of on the same page. Because number one, I think what most women consider the problems of menopause, I'm going to air quote that, are actually the symptoms of perimenopause that appear long before the game is over.
yeah.
So menopause technically is 1 year from the last time you had your menstrual cycle. That's the official day. So it's a single
Mhm.
day in time. That's it. And there is no postmenopause. You are just menopausal, right? And so the way to think about that is it's when your egg carton, where your ovaries are, is empty, right? There's no more eggs left in the carton. It's empty. However, the process of getting into emptying the eggs on average in the United States is 7 to almost 8 years. So that
Mhm.
means that the symptoms that start to appear on average for women is about an 8 year journey, which means, it's a bell curve. So that means some people sail through, don't really have a lot of symptoms at all, but I would say they're very much an outlier. And the other women could have, 16 years of symptoms. And so most of what we feel, the libido, I'm looking on the list, the weight gain, the mood swings, the hot flashes, night
Mhm.
sweats, that is all occurring usually before that ship has sailed.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So when women talk about menopause, really often they're talking about that period, but then for some as well, there are symptoms that will linger past that day, that singular day that is menopause in the menopausal phase of life. And that too also tends to be associated with menopause, right? Why people aren't overly excited. They see that weight gain, they see that memory and brain tend to be one I hear often, and often
Yes.
lingering hot flushes, half sweats, however you want to name that. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So they
Yeah.
start early and they can perpetuate into, a decade or more afterwards. There are
Yeah.
women that, are 65 still having hot flashes, 15 years later. So, and that is because of the profound loss of these hormones and how much control they have over the body. It's
Yeah.
interesting when we bring up like the brain symptoms, the brain fog and the memory, right? Like, where did I put my keys? What's the name of that girl that I've known for 20 years?
Yeah.
We, what we do know from imaging, age imaging, the same woman from like 35 through menopause, the work of Dr. Lisa Mosconi is that there's an extraordinary amount of remodeling that happens in the brain that causes a lot of those symptoms. So a lot of times that's where we keep feeling it, right? Like we keep,
Yeah.
what's going on? And we think it's something worse than what it may be.
Yeah. So it's literally in the person's head, but not in the way that many doctors have until maybe recently dismissed it, right? Because traditionally, and let's hold space for this, traditionally women would have gone to the doctor and the doctor was like, oh, guess it's that time. Good luck, have fun, see you later. And then we're told like anything they came forward with after the fact was kind of in the head if it wasn't a hot flash, right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we have like the history of this. So hysterectomies started with, late 1800s male dominated medicine,
Yeah.
taking out the wandering womb, and I'm air quoting that, the wandering womb, because they felt that that was the wandering womb that was making women hysterical, right?
Mhm.
All the symptoms of menopause and perimenopause. Um, and then, so we were dismissive then, but there was a significant amount of time from, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that hormone replacement therapy for women for the treatment of menopause and osteoporosis was approved and utilized
Yeah.
like candy. They were the
Yeah.
top prescribed medications around, even like rivaling statin drugs. So
Mm.
we also have to remember that the baby boomers should be pissed because they were robbed of the opportunity of hormones because they were told based on one study.
Yeah.
But the reality is this was something we treated. 40 to 70% of women in all westernized countries were treated with hormones routinely.
Yeah.
And then it
Yeah.
was, it's in your head and you need 14 medications to make up for the loss of those hormones.
Yeah, I'm always amazed when I see postmenopausal women who come in without hormones but are on the antidepressants and other agents that are very much band-aiding the lack of hormone. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I mean, routinely. So you got hot flashes, so they give you Vioza now, and then you can't sleep, so then they give you Ambien, and then you're like, I'm rageful 1 minute and I'm crying the next minute, and then I just don't care anymore. And so they're like, you need
Yeah,
antidepressant, and then a statin, and then a hypertension medication. So they just start stacking.
yeah, yeah. And then begins the polypharmacy. So let's talk about options here. Maybe I wonder if we kind of, this is my favorite soapbox of yours, but why don't we dissect that comment? You have many soapboxes and I love them all.
I
And so
know, I
I'm
do.
gonna give you this one because I think it's really important that we dwell just for a moment on that singular study that you referred to and how that kind of vilified for a generation the idea of supplemental hormone.
Yeah. So we had many studies that were conducted from the 50s all the way through the 90s that showed hormone replacement therapy for women was protective and even protective in breast cancer. So flash forward to the Women's Health Initiative. So this is a study started in the late 90s that was intended to run for 8 years, I believe. And what they were wanting to understand was if hormone replacement therapy, specifically in the form of basically two different drugs, Premarin, which is made from horse pea, right? So it's derived from pregnant mares, and another form called Prem Pro, which was Premarin with a combined synthetic progestin, which is medroxyprogesterone. And both drugs were commonly prescribed, although I would say Premarin was definitely way more prescribed than others. And then they had a group that were on no hormones at all. Well, what they were looking for was mortality from cardiovascular disease, either stroke or heart attack. Well, in a real world, you would have a healthy group, a group that was on the Premarin, and a group that was on the, and you would have healthy individual in these groups. Well, but you would have to run the study for like 30, 40 years to see mortality, right? So what they did is they said, well, we can't run it that long. It's too expensive. So we're going to go ahead and pick people who have cardiovascular disease. So the average age of the woman was 67. So they were good 10, 15 years out of menopause. They all were previous smokers, or not everyone, but the vast majority were previous smokers or smokers. They had high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, high cholesterol. So they already had heart disease and cardiovascular disease.
Mm-hmm.
So they start the study and they find in the single arm that has the Prem Pro, right, the synthetic progestins, showed an increased risk for stroke. So they stopped the study, right? Because at that point, it's no longer ethical to keep the study going. However, while they were going through peer review, so this is really important as somebody who has written PhD papers, you go through peer review because you have somebody from the outside who doesn't potentially have your biases or anything else looking at how you do your math and how you come to your conclusions to make sure you don't make a mistake, because it happens all the time.
We're human.
We're human. And so while it was in peer review, a small subcommittee in this very large committee that wrote the paper ran out and started digging through data. The other thing you never do on studies, well, I mean, we do it all the time, but we shouldn't do it, is when you create a study, the entire study is wrapped around the question you ask. Now, you have other data in there that you can pull, but studies that pull data out of existing databases are missing some really important factors. When you start digging, they call it mining for data, because that wasn't the question you were originally asking. However, they started digging around and said, is there any statistics for breast cancer risk?
Yeah.
So what they found was, number one, the most important thing that no one ever talked about was the women that were on Premarin alone. So the single horse pea urine, pill had a 23% reduced risk of breast cancer compared to the women who had nothing and compared to the women that were on the Prem Pro. Nobody's heard that. But they saw that the risk for breast cancer went from an average in all populations. So if you're a midlife woman, we're in a 4 in 1,000 chance. So 4 out of 1,000 women have a chance of getting breast cancer. In their study, they found that the other group on Prem Pro had a 5 in 1,000 chance. Not statistically significant. That could have easily been a mistake. And instead, they wrote it up in the study as a 25% increase, which it is when you look at going from 4 to 5.
Yeah.
And in that moment, every woman was taken off of medications. Everybody stopped prescribing it. And the world halted hormone therapy from conventional medicine for 2 decades. Now, all follow-ups and everything else since then is gone. Since then, it's gone, right? That everything they alluded to was completely inaccurate. Wow. And so we have 2 decades and, a generation and a half of women really that have been robbed of the opportunity to get hormones in that most valuable window. Doesn't mean they can't have them. Yeah. But the truth is hormones protect our brain, our heart, our bones. We were never intended to live 30, 40 years past menopause. Yeah. We just weren't.
Yeah. 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 It's the first time in human history that we're aware of that we have this opportunity, and of consequence need support for that. Yeah. So I want to dive into the conversation of, now that we've understood kind of how we got to the point where hormones were vilified, I want to talk about how supplemental hormone can be an option for women and what that option would address, what that kind of covers when it comes to the symptomology of menopause. But before I do that, audience, Dr. Murray and I, we show up to the end of supporting you and educating you, and we want to know what you want to know. So I'm going to ask Vanny if you can toss up the survey that we had at the beginning. We're just going to run through that so we can understand what the audience here tonight is hoping to understand. So we asked our audience first, where are you in relation to your menopause journey? 35% of the audience is perimenopausal. We have 18% of the audience that is menopausal, so freshly around that 12-month mark. And then we have 42% that is postmenopausal. And then a happy 4% that isn't sure. And we want to make sure that we speak to that happy 4% because I think that's a really important question. There's a lot of conditions that can kind of halt period that may not be perimenopause. And there's different testing that can kind of give you some insight to support your work with the doctor. So we'll make sure we speak to that. The next question we asked here was, what are the symptoms you frequently experiencing? I've seen quite a few people in the chat really talk to memory. And so sleep issues is the top one here with about 56% of our audience. The other top two are going to be brain fog, memory, which people are echoing within the chat, and then fatigue as well. 10% is saying other. So audience, if you're someone that said other, I'd love it if you could list that in the chat so that we know what that other is and we can help be of support there. The next question we asked, what have you done to try and find relief? 60% of the audience has done something to the end of herbal remedies or supplements, 70% diet and lifestyle. Audience, I love this. I love this. That tends to, yeah, sincerely, that tends to be some of the more difficult things to pick up. So congratulations to you, audience. And about 50% has tried or is on BHRT or HRT. The last question that we'll go over here is, how confident do you feel in your understanding of what's happening within your body? And I find this such a telling question when we ask women, because sometimes there's such a disconnect that has been ingrained in women between their body and what they think they know. 50% of our audience is only saying somewhat confident, 20% not confident, and then an honest 7% is saying completely confused. And so again, we'll speak to in particular how testing hormones, we have a new product in particular that might be helpful, how testing hormones can offer a little bit of insight in there, in particular when working with a really strong practitioner. So Dr. Betty, let's I'm just quickly looking at the chat for the other symptoms before we jump into how BHRT might be able to address some of the symptoms. A lot of people have put weight gain. Some people have put vaginal dryness, and then a sarcopenia, so muscle loss of muscle. And then there's a blessed person here, well, maybe not blessed, but an opposite issue insofar as much of our audience has said struggling with sleep, and then one person saying they're sleeping more than they would expect to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of where our audience is at, weight gain, loss of memory, those sorts of things. Do you want to talk to us how BHRT can be something of a solution for this?
Yeah. So let me give some context. We've always perceived, and actually conventional medicine, including the Menopause Society, look at hormone replacement as a quality of life thing, right? So they go, okay, you want hormone replacement so you don't get hot flashes and you don't want to smack your significant other and you don't feel weepy. I mean, seriously, I say these things in humor, but I'm being very honest. That is Medicare's assumption of it, and conventional medicine looks at hormone replacement as a quality of life thing. I'm here to tell you today that hormone replacement, especially appropriately done, and ideally, the closer we get to that menopause transition, the better it is. But if you are 65, 70, that doesn't mean it doesn't help you. But we know that we got the absolute best case scenario earlier, reduces your risk of dying from all causes. Full stop. Full stop. My team has a specialty in osteoporosis, and the stats right now are if a woman is over 65, 50% of the women that fall and break something will never regain the fitness or capacity of movement they had before. And that is 100% reducible by putting hormones in and diet and lifestyle and lifting weights. So the reality is all of these symptoms, when we lose estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, right? Testosterone's on a slow roll. It's going downhill from the 20s. Progesterone is relatively normal until mid-30s, and it starts to decline. Then it takes a rapid decline in our 40s. And it's when estrogen is gone is when we get like all of it, right? Mm-hmm. When we lose those hormones, it is a full body effect. It is not just your breast tissue or your ovaries. It is every cell in your body, except for two itty bitty cells, have estrogen receptors. So it affects your brain, it affects your heart, your bone, it affects every tissue. The powerhouse in your cell, your mitochondria that help you burn fat, estrogen receptors on it, and it goes to sleep, right? So all of the symptoms, the weight gain, the memory loss, is because of the loss of that estrogen and its stimulatory and anti-inflammatory effect and its remodeling effect. And so that's why we feel it. And what we don't understand always is like, why do some women get horrible brain fog and some women get horrible hot flashes, right? I've never had a hot flash. That wasn't my thing. I had a bunch of other ones, right? We know that the women that have, a narrower natural body temperature swing. Like we have a thermostat, our hypothalamus is the thermostat. And those of us who have a really narrow band of where our body's natural temperature seems to wax and wane tend to have worse hot flashes, right? And then we know certain ethnic backgrounds, people of African descent have more hot flashes than others. We can't explain all of it. Some of it's probably deeply embedded in a bunch of random genes that we don't understand. But your symptoms are kind of unique to you, but cholesterol climbing, weight gain, those are all parts of losing that hormone.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the people in the back, I want it reiterated. Hormone replacement therapy, and for those that are asking what the B stands for, bioidentical. And so if you listen back to what Dr. Betty said in regards to kind of horse urine and some other synthetics, right? This is more something that the body perceives as self as opposed to a synthetic form. So bioidentical hormone replacement therapy is not something to manage symptoms in the sense of just managing mood or just managing hot flushes. This is to the end of managing brain, managing your cardiovascular system, managing bones, managing insulin, managing. It is what will enable body to be healthy, happy longer. Correct? Is that what I'm hearing? This is not a
100%.
cosmetic thing.
Yeah, it's not a cosmetic thing. Here, ladies, you should feel honored if you live past 55, because in 1900 you wouldn't have, right? Our lifespan was shortly after menopause, right? Like dead, right? So the fact that we get to live 30, 40 years is awesome, but it's unprecedented. And so it really is, it increases our risk. So for example, men have a greater risk of heart disease and stroke when they're younger. But women, when we hit menopause, we accelerate and age match them within 5 to 10 years, which means that we're going to look just like them within 10 years. But we are more likely to die from our heart attack or stroke than a man. And it's the leading cause of death for women, not breast cancer. Sorry, ladies. 1 out of 2 of us will have a cardiovascular problem or event that leads to our final demise, right? Hopefully way late in life. But hormone replacement helps our arteries revamp and keeps them, rebuilding so they don't get plaquing, right? We're protected until we lose estrogen. So it's real important that you know that it's not just about getting rid of hot flashes and having libido. It really is, it's vital to the body, right? And we lose, the body kind of goes, okay, it's time to kind of mold and decay.
Yeah. And there's happy fringe benefits, right? Like I think supporting vaginal dryness, supporting libido is a delightful fringe benefit.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful, but it is not per se the purpose and the point of BHRT.
Yeah. I mean, it's super important. So let me step back because like you said, I want to make sure BHRT is very understandable. So synthetic drugs and bioidentical drugs are different, right? So Premarin is pee, right, from a horse. That's not exaggeration, that's real. But yeah, so think of your hormone as a key, right? So this is the key. This is my estrogen key. When I have a drug that's a synthetic estrogen, so I can patent it, the key is different, right? I might be able to jam it in the lock. I might be able to wiggle it and get the door to open, but it's not the same. And the reason why the drug companies do that is they can patent the drug. When it is bioidentical, it is chemically made, but it is the exact chemistry structure as the key your body makes. So when it clicks into the cell and turns the key and turns on the engine, the cell knows exactly what to do with it. We do not use synthetic forms anymore. We use bioidentical forms because we've got more elegant and better ways to do it today. And so that's really, really important because when you have synthetic ones, they're going to have synthetic byproducts that affect your DNA pathways and detoxification at different levels than something that's bioidentical.
Yeah. All right. So I wonder if we can start to get into the conversation of things that will guide awareness around perimenopause and menopause,
Mhm.
both from a testing, like from a hormone testing perspective, as well as a DNA testing perspective, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So where would you like to start? Because I think both are palpable questions and both are really, really important because they offer insight, but different insight. Do you want to start with genes or do you want to start with hormone testing?
Yeah, let's talk about hormone testing. And
Mhm.
the reality is, everybody deserves the right to identify whether hormones are right for them. Everybody deserves the right to have the conversation regardless of age. And
Mm.
does every woman go on hormones? No, but we just have to recognize that the aging process accelerates with the loss of those, right? That's just the reality. So then it comes to, how do you identify whether you have enough hormones, particularly if you're going on them, or too much? Because the reality is, each woman, if you were to line up 100 women or 100 men for that matter, right, and put them in a line, each one of us look a little bit different, right? We're built a little different. One's taller, one's leaner, one's this, one's that. A lot of what defines our body shape is our hormones, right?
Mhm.
So we don't know what your level was at 25, maybe when everything was perfect and everything else. And so one of the ways that conventional medicine looks at it, if you're choosing to go on hormones, it's like, oh, okay, we're going to just start and we'll give you hormones. And if your hot flashes go away and you're not angry anymore and you feel like your brain's working better, you're good, right? And maybe that gets rid of the symptoms and makes the quality of life better. But we look at it and we're like, okay, if I want to do what I want to do, which is part of it, is go, okay, I want to live as healthy as possible, as long as possible, because we outlive men by an average of 4.5 years, but our health span is actually poorer. So we have
Mm.
longer life, but in poorer health, right? As statistics, I'm running statistics here. I'm just giving you the
Yeah.
research, right? So if I test hormones, right, there's testing hormones in blood is quick, easy, and often a good way to kind of understand where we're starting. Like
Yeah.
my telemedicine team and my clinical team, we always look at it because guess what? Part of the reason why we gain weight when we go through the menopausal transition is because body fat can make estrogen, and the body starts to ramp up the production of fat to produce more estrogen. So you can have some estrogen in the body. It's just not from your ovaries, and it's in a form called estrone, which is less favorable, right? So if I check your blood, I can see kind of what your body is naturally trying to do today. And then if your provider is actually putting hormones in, you put them in and you look for symptom resolution, you look for all those things, and you want to test and make sure that you're in a level that is going to also get you a biological effect, which is shown to protect the brain, the heart, the bones. And in most cases, that's a very, very, very low dose. Now, back in the day, like our grandmothers and maybe some of our mothers, what was used back then were really high levels compared to what's used today, because you don't need it. You need fractions of what you made before, right? So 50 years ago, they were using different doses. And but you want to check and see. So we often look at it and we go, okay, check it in blood before, kind of know where we're starting, because it's hard to have a map if you don't know where you started, right? And then you check it again to see, are we in the ballpark range of improvement? Because we can't go on symptoms alone. And then even more importantly, we then match it to the DNA, and then we match it to how you metabolize it. And I'll
Mhm.
explain why. Your hormones have to get used in the body first, and then they go to the liver and they use different enzyme pathways in the liver to get packaged up and get ready for the trash, and then get taken out to the trash. Your DNA defines how good you are at those steps, and it's a multi-step process. And some of us genetically are really good at it, some of us aren't,
Mhm.
right? And so when you look at your hormones in urine, you get to see the DNA in action. So if somebody's on this call and they're like, "Cool, I love my DNA. What else can I know?" If you check the urine, you can actually see what those pathways are doing, especially if you have hormones on board. Sometimes it's hard if you don't have any hormones at all and you're very, very, very low. Those tests lose accuracy because there's just not much going through there. But we check to make sure they're getting to the trash, right? That's why you would look in urine. And the DNA tells you kind of where you need to go, right? What likelihood are you at taking it to a trash can that may get overflowing, right? Or can you take it to a trash can that's like a super construction dumpster and you can throw everything in it, right? Those things
Yeah.
really help,
Yeah. Yeah.
really, really help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I also really value genetic hormone profiles to the end of readying for perimenopause and menopause, because
Yep.
there's a certain element of different profiles will they do not necessitate, it means it will not happen necessarily, but they can predict a little bit more of a turbulent
Mhm.
menopause for some people. And so, with that in mind, I've worked with people where they're like, I want to do a fully natural, I'm not open to supplemental. That's great. That's a wonderful choice. Good.
Yes.
Um, but we
Yeah.
know that their genetic profile has them open to a lot more swings. And so we get a lot more aggressive with those natural approaches in order to
Yes.
balance that. And I promise you that's possible. It takes a lot more work. I want to be plain. So if you're someone, if you're looking at your DNA 360, you're looking in the hormone section and you see your profile as someone with a dominant, we tend to go estrogen or androgen. Balanced or dominant. If you're someone with a dominant, you're typically going to experience a little bit more of a tumultuous menopausal time. And if
Mhm.
that's the case, that means what you're doing, be it BHRT, be it diet lifestyle, be it supplements, just needs to be a lot more aggressive because you can
Yeah.
balance it. There just has to be an element of aggression to it. And that's helpful to know, right? It's helpful to get ahead of those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I know early on some people were like, I've tried some herbals and I've tried, some other things and definitely diet and lifestyle. Here's the deal too. Hormones are not a panacea, right? They are
Mhm.
they are a tool,
Yeah.
right? And they're a tool that is used often, but not all the time, right? But if if you're not doing diet and lifestyle and eat, trying to improve those things, throwing hormones on a body that isn't very healthy to begin with doesn't repair it all either.
Yeah.
Because there are people marketing that online all the time, like, oh, just take estrogen, you'll lose weight. I'm like, no,
Mm-mm. Nope.
no. It can
Nope.
help as long as everything else is being worked on because it does have a metabolic effect.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's really important just to understand that it's one of the tools, and
Yeah.
using urinary hormone testing helps you kind of see what's happening in real time. The other
Yeah.
thing is those genetic pathways are so very heavily manipulated by diet intake, right? Broth in the family,
Mhm.
berries,
Mhm. Mhm.
rosemary, citrus bioflavonoids, curcumin, all
Fiber.
kinds
Yeah.
fiber, right? All
Fiber.
nutrients can actually make those clean up
Yeah.
in ways that are really profound. And I think that's important too.
Alongside exercise, I think the older I get, the more I'm impressed with clinically how far exercise can go to shifting some of that picture for women, because
Oh
it's
yeah,
such a strong detox mechanism for women. Yeah.
it is, and exercise, because it raises circulation and
Mhm.
heat shock proteins, all these things. It's one of
Yeah.
the few things that pretty much resoundingly across the board ages you in reverse. Like
Yeah.
it has one of the more profound longevity effects. Like so
Yeah.
you can't age well if you're not moving.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is neat and which is powerful because most people have access to that, right? There might be some people with mobility issues and then the question becomes, let's work with a professional who can support you where you're at. It's a very
Totally.
powerful thing that almost everyone has access to.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to transition into Q&A, but before that I do want to just speak a little bit to people who are, of the camp. I don't know where I am. And goodness, I value the confusion. I value the honesty around that.
Mhm.
One thing you can consider, and this would have to be coupled
Mhm.
work with a practitioner. There is a test kit now. So everything that Dr. Betty has talked about so
Mhm.
far, the serum testing for hormones or the urine, typically tend to be a one-off shot, and they are very, very powerful insofar as they go into a lot of different metabolites, a lot of different pathways, but they're always one point in time.
Yep.
Sometimes, especially if you're in the space of, I literally do not know where I am, because we'll say like, hey, you want to do this urine test or this blood test on day certain of your cycle. If you have no idea what day you're on of your cycle, something you can consider is the Mira test. It's available on our website. And what it does is it's a little egg of sorts. And what you do is once a day, first morning pee, you pee into a cup, you take a sampling of that. It sounds really gross, and I guess kind of it is, but it's very clean. I promise you get the equipment so you don't have to touch anything. And then you take that sample and you put it into the little egg. It's a device that will read certain metabolites. It's not as extensive as the laboratory based your intestine so far as you're not going to get as many parameters, but it gives you really key hormones that over time, over those trends, can really help pick up where you are in that journey and what supports might be appropriate for you. Yeah, so it's called the Mira MI. Thank you.
RA. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
close.
It
Thank
was
you.
created out of fertility treatments. Cause
Yeah.
again, understanding where your hormones are, help you pick,
Yeah.
like when to try and work on your fertility. But you can see, particularly if you're still cycling or it's getting a little bit off, you can see where they are varying and they're sort of out of balance with each other. So it helps you sort of understand, hey, I'm down that rabbit hole a little bit and it's going to change, right?
Yeah.
Over time. Now, if you're menopausal, that's not going to do much because there's not much going on.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Unless I guess if you were on hormones, you could do that, but you don't, in a menopausal woman, if you're on hormones, you don't necessarily need to check
Yeah.
your hormones constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. This is for that group of people that are kind of like, I'm still bleeding, but I'm getting pretty close and they're not consistent. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's really important to understand too, that you could be, out of eggs, right? There's still some variation happening in your hormones that tell your body to try and ovulate, but that you're not ovulating all the time, and that your overall estrogen level can actually be low and you can still cycle.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important because that doesn't get said enough, because a lot of times it's like, no, it must be high because I'm still cycling. I'm like, no, 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 it could still be low, but it's just not low enough to stop it.
Yeah. Yeah. Gorgeous. All right, Madele, I think we're going to transfer
Yes.
into our questions and
Questions.
answers now. Questions. All right. Amy has our first question. Um, and it's a little a too topic, but I mean, still on there because these people will
Yeah.
go
Mhm.
through perimenopause as well. Any DNA markers that can shed light on endometriosis or PMDD, and those effects that might and does this affect hormonal replacement options? And then they're also worried about ovarian and cervical cancer. I would speculate in relation to BHRT. Um,
I'm thinking actually, Amy may be speaking specifically about, are there any
or the
ways to
end.
DNA and figure out if she's at risk for ovarian and cervical cancers? That's what
Uh, got it. Thank you.
and
I appreciate you. Your brain's online today. Mine a little bit less.
yeah, that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I can take this one, or would you
yeah,
like?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since you're actually with DNA Co, you can answer some of that, and I can always throw in my 2 cents worth because I always have.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll say there's two answers to this. Th there's not a singular gene known right now that will diagnose any
Mhm.
of these conditions. What we're seeing is it tends to be a collection of genes, a constellation, if you will. The
Mhm.
DNA 360 is not a test that you would get to diagnose or to gain insight into any of these specific conditions. I think it's really, really, really helpful to the end of how do I go about treatment and supporting, because it gives really good context to the body and how these conditions might be impacting the body and how the body's terrain is going to influence them. That said, there's going to be a few other companies that you're looking for, it's a GWAS study, and that will look at a bunch of different markers and say this constellation is associated with this condition, and you may or may not have that constellation. So you're looking at different diagnostic companies. If you want to reach out to us, I can point you in the direction of one that does that sort of testing. Um, and they will also, I know that they do it for ovarian. I'm not as confident about cervical cancer. And then this can be educational to you in regards to HRT options, because I know some people with that history of cancer, in spite of where the research is, may be a bit hesitant to be bringing in BHRT. And Dr.
Yeah.
Betty, did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely like the CYP1B1 pathway has some association with like endometriosis, fibroids, that kind of thing. So there are some insights. They're not, DNA tests are not diagnostic. They're more indicative, right? And I
Mhm.
think it's really important when we talk about cancer, whether it's breast cancer, cervical cancer. I think DNA is a small piece of that, right? And we're not talking about DNA, diagnostic DNA. I'm talking about the DNA that we're looking at in the DNA Co, where you're looking at things that affect how enzymes and detoxification, biotransformation, mitochondrial function work, right?
Mhm.
That's piece. We have to remember that so much of what is happening in our world today, we have food that 200 years ago didn't exist. We have chemicals that 200 years ago didn't exist. Everything was organic until the Industrial Revolution. like
Yeah.
literally. And so we have all of these other constellations of things that make us much, much more unwell today than our own grandparents, right? Like my grandmother grew up on a farm. She ate moldy bread. She just like cut away for a little bit. She'd eat it anyway. Like most people today, that would make them unwell. And she lived to 90, right? So
Yeah.
we are in a different cosmic soup than what they were in.
Yeah.
And so when we
Yeah.
look at cancers and things like that, there's so many pieces that go into that. We don't have one-on-one relationships like
Yeah.
that.
I think I love that you say that because and I'm always careful not to romanticize this, but within and this was most studied within Japanese cultures, but within Japan up until about the 70s, there wasn't really a concept of, and you see this within several other communities who live more traditional lives. There's really not a concept of perimenopause. It's just kind of menopause. All of a sudden, period's gone. And there
Yeah.
isn't kind of this hoopla. And part of that is this just a different primordial soup that those people are existing within. And that's changing, right? Now, post 70s, Japanese have a concept of perimenopause because the West and Western influence and industrialization has come in and shifted that a lot.
Mhm.
So it's really important to know that the concept, this violence that we have within menopause wasn't always, and it doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of it is definitely cultural. And then, again, our environment, like we had the fertility summit and like testosterone levels are significantly below what they were 40, 50 years ago. Why? Like, why?
Yeah.
You know,
Mm. Mm.
and so, all of those things disrupt our body. And we see, they did a study, who was it? It was Flow Space. And I think it was John Hopkins University. And of the women that they surveyed, the women that were under 40, so these women in their 30s, like 30% of them, so a pretty high percentage, it was somewhere between 25 and like 32, were having what we would consider was perimenopausal, menopausal symptoms. We're talking abnormal periods, hot flashes. We can't explain that because it's not something that we've seen before. And it's not our DNA doing it, it's
Yeah.
our environment.
Yeah. 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 It's when it's a collection, not the one-off person. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Our next question is coming in from Sheila. Are there any concerns with HRT if they're co-dominant? And so, audience, co-dominant is a DNA 360 categorization. Dominant meaning you're someone who produces a lot of sex steroid hormone. Co meaning you have pathways that both encourage estrogen as well as androgen or testosterone. So
Mm-hmm.
you love all the hormones. You have pathways that really support it. So is there concern with HRT if you are those, in particular, if methylation may not be the strongest in this person? So I will say, by and large, at least in my experience so far, people with dominant profiles tend to appreciate the support of HRT more than those with the balanced profiles. And Betty, I'll allow you to elaborate on that one. But when it comes to methylation, I think knowing your methylation pathways before and with HRT is exceptionally important because methylation is the one guy that really supports the clearance of estrogen. And so if you're not properly clearing that, be it your own supply or exogenous supply, you're going to get into some trouble.
Right, right. No, I would agree with that. Um, I honestly, I am of the firm belief, after 20 years of clinical practice and tens of thousands of patients in our clinic, um, you know, if done right, most people that go on hormones, regardless of their MTHFR, we've been testing genetics since 2012, and MTHFR even prior to that. Can do that and be well supported and in many cases do great, right? So I don't think there's anybody, even if you look at conventional medicine, so the conventional medicine, like family history of breast cancer is not a contraindication, right? Personal history can be, right? Particularly around treatment and estrogen suppression and suppressing drugs, but even family history isn't, and that's in conventional care. Right. So I think it's been unnecessarily demonized.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm grateful that you're having those conversations to kind of take some of the demons out of the closet.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So the next question is Conley, and I think it's actually specific to what you're mentioning here. They can't have HRT for 10 or more years because they are, congratulations, 5 years out of breast cancer. Yeah, huge congratulations. That's amazing. Any suggestions, because this person is or Conley's experiencing fatigue, stubborn belly fat, mood swings, etc., kind of all the fun things. Are phytoestrogens still considered dangerous? Any other things that I can do?
Okay, so this is
Yes,
so
I love
yeah,
this
so
soapbox. Yes, go.
yes, so this is a book everybody either needs to listen to on Audible or buy and read. Personally, I'm an Audible person. It's called Estrogen Matters by Dr. Avram Blooming. And he's been treated as an oncologist, breast cancer oncologist for 50 years. It is the end all be all of the research around estrogen and breast cancers. And he's a firm believer, and I would say this is true too. When somebody has stopped treatment, right, they're no longer on estrogen blockers, that many women somewhere in the future can go on hormone replacement therapy. There's also Dr. Jen Simmons. She's a friend of mine, the Smart Woman's Guide to Breast Cancer. She absolutely can help people navigate this. She's a breast cancer surgeon. So the reality is as a lot of the estrogen blockers are just, they're suppressing all estrogen. So we might see more menopausal like symptoms. Here's the thing about phytoestrogens. Phytoestrogens in the form of genistein, flax, isoflavones from soy, they actually are helpful against breast cancer. They have been studied as treatment options for breast cancer. Tamoxifen, just so everybody understands, tamoxifen, which is used in postmenopausal breast cancer patients as a suppressor of natural estrogen production, is a synthetic estrogen. So phytoestrogens, and many of the people that maybe have done herbals are taking things that are phytoestrogenic, and that's why your symptoms are a little bit better, your hot flashes, your night sweats, that kind of things. I would do phytoestrogens, flax ligands, genistein, estrovera, all of those things can be helpful. They don't replace your estrogen. And I need to say that as somebody who's biochemist and I make supplements, believe me, if I could give you an herb and it could give you back hormones, I would. They can help symptoms reduce, but they don't replace what's no longer there. But you can do a lot to help, and I think you need to find a physician that is comfortable, that can work with you, that has worked with women that have been on breast cancer suppressing drugs and gone through therapy and still treat. I know in our clinic, we have women that are, 15, 20 years out and still on hormone replacement and rocking and rolling with no risks. Yeah. We do all the right things to monitor, but for them, the life that they were living compared to they weighed it and were like, it's more important for me to feel this way. Right. And to have these other risks taken care of.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. The next question is coming from Deborah. Do some women lose weight during menopause? I've only seen mention of gaining weight.
Yeah, it's way more common. So like statistically, on average, women will gain about, 15 to 20% of their lean body mass as additional body fat. So a 150-pound woman can, gain 15 to 20 pounds pretty easily because again, your body fat makes estrogen. So your body's like, cool, do you need more material? But some women do lose weight. And a lot of women, especially if we are not weight training, will actually see a loss of muscle mass because we lose muscle mass pretty rapidly. And that will also cause us to lose bone mass. So it's not a guarantee that all women will gain weight.
Yeah. It's a body composition issue yeah. Okay. Mare, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, is asking, can hormones cause copper toxicity?
Not directly, no. However, so there's a lot of conditions and other issues that could lead to an imbalance between zinc and copper. Probably the first and most important one is a condition called pyroluria, which has to do with how your body basically manages and stores and holds on to zinc and B6, which leads to kind of excess copper. And you can do a copper, a zinc, and a ceruloplasmin test in blood to see if that happens to go on. And you can even check for pyrroles in the urine.
Yeah.
There could be just zinc deficiency is really common. And if you don't get enough, you will be excessive in copper in comparison.
Yeah. And I think you're really highlighting the importance of having a good provider to walk you through the journey of whatever it is you bring into your regime, because they need to be able to know off the top of their head, or with their copious amounts of resources, how to dig in and what to be aware of, especially when onboarding hormone.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so Sharon is asking our next question. Do you see subluxation increasing in perimenopause? I am seeing many with SI joint pain that are either in peri or just into menopause. So I would imagine Sharon is an MSK provider.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So SI joint is your sacroiliac joint. So that's where your basically your sacrum or your tailbone meets your hip, right? So the hips look like a heart and they got a little diamond meeting it, right? And when they meet, there's ligaments across that, and you can sprain and pull it. And especially, so women's hips, just so we can talk about this structurally, men's hips look very straight. So when they lean forward, their hip hinge looks like, just straightforward. There's no hinging. But women, because we have childbearing hips, our hips are wider than the rest of our body. So when we hinge forward, our hips push out. So we are more likely to actually have damage on our SI joint. And my experience has been the vast majority of women with back pain, like significant number of them, are SI.
Yeah.
Now, what's even more interesting is there was a good paper that came out by Vonda Wright's group about the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. So what that means is the loss of estrogen and testosterone and progesterone, but particularly estrogen, leads to pain, joint pain, musculoskeletal changes in ligaments. We get changes in collagen production. We lose about 30% of our collagen production, which affects those joints. So a lot of us get pain, frozen shoulder, hip and back. All of a sudden you're like, I feel rickety. And there is an association there with the loss of hormones.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right. Melissa's asking a question. I'm grateful this has come up because I've seen it a few times in the chat as well. So, do you think that women need BHRT across the board? And I have opinions. You have opinions, and I'm
Yeah.
grateful. Let's set the table here. Would you like to start?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think every woman deserves the conversation. I don't
Mhm.
think anybody should ever be told that's not on the table for you.
Yeah.
But I don't think every woman needs it. I really don't. And like you said, you look at the Maasai tribe, you look at other tribes that don't live our Western lifestyle, and they don't have the same symptoms, right? The same problems. Now, do I think the vast majority of women would benefit because of the biological effects of these hormones? Yes. But I don't think you have to. Like, I have some patients that I've seen that I'm like, okay, yeah, let's not, right? Let's not. It doesn't have to be there. It's one of the tools that we can put in, right?
Yeah.
And help. The thing about it that always bothered me, well, there's obviously a ton because you guys hear me, is if you had thyroid deficiency, growth hormone deficiency, insulin deficiency, testosterone as a man deficiency, no one would ever question testing for it and replacing it.
Yeah.
But women go through a deficiency scenario because we're living so much longer than we were originally intended to live. And maybe 100,000 years from now, we'll go through menopause at 75, right? Highly likely. But the reality is we demonize women for thinking about us and then make everybody think they're crazy or something else because we're asking the questions. So I think it absolutely deserves the conversation. But if you feel fine, right? If you feel fine and you're doing all those things to take care of you, do you need them? Not necessarily.
Yeah. And I think the encouragement, and we strongly agree on this, is the idea of every woman deserves to understand their options, and then every woman gets to pick from those options.
Yeah.
There's an element of we don't get to decide those options for you, but it's our job to ensure you understand that. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And that's the important part. And I think we become a little bit more emphatic around the BHRT conversation because for so long it was villainized. And we know how profoundly life-shifting it can be. So it's a job to an extent to elevate an option that by and large has been suppressed.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So the next question we have here is from Angie. Which genes in the DNA 360 on the report should codominant women be mindful of that may contribute to breast cancer? Yeah. So we look at a few, really what you want to be looking at is your CYP19A1, and then some of your estrogen metabolizers as well. So if you're jumping into your hormone report, if you're jumping into the summary section's a very convenient place that you can see all of this. Those are really going to curate how much estrogen you're making. And your CYP 1A1, 1B1, and 3A4. And I'm going to toss these in the chat so that you get that alphabet soup. Those are also really going to be curating how your body breaks down estrogen, how it metabolizes estrogen, and each of those will come about with a different risk profile when it comes to these sorts of things. And so those that in particular are fast in any of those last three genes that I listed, and again, I'll toss this in the chat so that everyone can see it. Being really mindful to work with a doctor in particular around hormone metabolites, some of the urine testing becomes really important because you want proper balances. Betty, do you want to add to that as I kind of type some stuff in?
Yeah, and I think I just saw Jade's question. I think we can kind of crush these
Beautiful, please.
together. Yeah. So Jade's question was, if her DNA report says she has a propensity for estrogen toxicity, that does that mean, she should keep taking estrogen or not? So if you are fast at moving estrogen down less favorable pathways. So I like to think my example is you've got a house, that's your body. And I'm cleaning out the house. So I'm cleaning out the closets and the attic and everything else. I've got to wrap things in tissue paper to take them out to the garage. And then from the garage, I got to take it to the dumpster. When you have very fast pathways in these estrogen toxicity pathways, what happens is you get it to the garage and you may not be able to get it to the dumpster. It's like the garage door doesn't open. So here's the thing. If you're have your own estrogen or taking estrogen because you're in menopause or whatever, if you support those pathways and you eat foods that help balance those pathways, because we wouldn't, to be honest, I'm saying this like I am part of the DNA company, but the reality is giving you a DNA test that you can't do anything about would be of zero value. If anything, I would say it's actually counterproductive. But the cool thing about these nutritionally manipulatable mutations are we can do a ton. I think someday I'm going to throw this up there, Dr. Kosterman. I think I should show my DNA report so we can all appreciate how crappy my estrogen pathways are. Because I'm going to be really honest, because I am an estrogen dominant, terrible detoxer, can't methylate, comped slow. I got them all. And I am on hormones, but I support the heck out of those pathways, right? So you can absolutely do that. The DNA tells you what you might do. The urinary hormone tests tell you what you're doing right now.
Yep.
And the two of those together with diet and lifestyle can do a lot to fix it.
Yep. Yeah. Genes aren't destiny. I say that like I have great cognitive genes, everything from neck down. And so there's an element of it's how you live your life and how you support in the light of, right? You know this, therefore you live differently and you live better of consequence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I
our
will totally take
grandparents
you
had
from that offer.
our grandparents had these genes, right? Our
Yeah.
grandparents lived to 90, 100. They didn't have the same problems because their environment wasn't as toxic.
Yeah. And that's a key element to be aware of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Um, Sheila is asking the question of what is the best time during the cycle to do the Dutch test? And the answer is there's several. Dr. Betty?
Yeah, there are several. So if you're in menopause, if you're in menopause, this is my personal opinion. I'm not a fan of doing the Dutch test if your hormones are at rock bottom. And the reason why is you have to have some in there to be able to measure, right? And even on the test, they'll say really low levels may result in erroneous tests. If you're cycling, so you can do it anytime, right? And now, if you're cycling, generally speaking, we try and pick it in the second half of your cycle, which is called the luteal phase, when your PMS and stuff like that is generally the worst, where you're more likely to be able to get pregnant. That's because both estrogen and progesterone are at their peaks at that point. So we can see what the disparity is, because it's more so about what are they doing relative to each other, right? Testosterone tends to be more stable. Cortisol is related to your stress. So if you're cycling, most of the time we're going to do it right in that like day 19, 20, 21 on a 26 to 30 day cycle, somewhere in that ballpark range. Usually we can pick it up.
I love it. And so, Reese, that kind of spoke to a little bit of your question as well. Because when we're talking about blood, you're still going to be targeting similar periods,
Yeah.
again, based on what you're trying to investigate. All
Yes.
right. Lisa is asking a question, and Lisa, just to be aware, Dr. Betty knows everything, but she's not your doctor. And so she'll offer some insight, but you really do need to take this back to your doctor.
Yeah.
Uh, I used to take BHRT creams and then was told that they aren't as effective and was told instead to use a pill. Do you have an opinion on this? And then the question of how do I know it is working again? I would imagine that would go back to, testing. But do you have an
Yeah.
opinion on topicals versus orals?
Yeah. So here's my opinion. Um, bioidentical first, right? Just because there's no reason to take something that doesn't match what the body makes because we have better science today. With that being said, generally estrogens and testosterone should be given topically in the form of a cream, a, a patch, or an injectable, or then there's also pellets. Not many people do pellets. Actually, a lot of people probably do pellets, but I'm not as much of a fan, although my clinicians in my clinic do use them. We just modify the normal dose. And the reason why is when it absorbs topically, and this is testosterone and estrogen, when it absorbs topically, it goes into the body, gets utilized, then goes to the liver. When you take estrogen or testosterone orally, it goes to the liver first, goes through that DNA pathway, whether you're good at it or not, and then it gets utilized. And so you make a lot of byproducts. Oral estrogen, particularly Premarin, is associated with stroke risk in older women because of that. There was a very large study, and if you just Google safety of hormone replacement over 65 and look at the Menopause Society study of 10 million women, they showed for the first time, because it was a large study with a lot of women, that topical estrogen did not increase the risk of stroke or heart attack in older women because it wasn't being first metabolized by the liver. So I'm a fan of topical estrogen, topical testosterone. Now, does estradiol come in an oral? Yes, I'm not a huge fan, but some people are like, no, man, I won't be doing the patch. I won't be doing a cream. Not everybody absorbs the cream. Some people are allergic to the patch. So the reality is it needs to be personalized to you. Progesterone should be oral or vaginal. Creams generally are not necessary. They don't have the same research showing that they can protect the uterine lining, because its job is to balance estrogen and make sure estrogen doesn't bring too much blood supply and proliferation of cells in the uterine lining. It's not a bad thing. It's just what estrogen does there. It's a job. It's its job. And you have to have progesterone to balance it. And oral progesterone is better at sleep and relaxation because of how it gets metabolized. So that's the rules.
Beautiful. I love it. Merci, madame. All right, we have two more questions here. So, Luhu, and I hope I'm saying that correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're saying that if you've gained weight postmenopausally, after always having been very lean, which is likely estrone, if you add in supplemental estrogens, do you think that adding in those estrogens is going to help clear the weight as well as inflammation?
Um, the challenge is this is, it's never fun working with metabolism. Estrogen alone or getting hormones put in can help the entire process, right? Because then you're turning your cells back on, your mitochondria are going to be more efficient, your glucose transport will be more efficient. But often we have to still double down because it doesn't come off the same way it went in. I'm just being really honest as somebody that went through that, because when I went through perimenopause, my metabolism went just nuts. But having estradiol, and I'm a fan of estriol, and you can see it in the DNA company as to why, having those on board where you get normal function and you're adding the right resistance training and dietary changes will definitely make it easier and reduce some of the inflammation, and then therefore the right activities can help weight loss, but in itself it doesn't necessarily cause weight loss.
I was on mute for a second. All right. Our last question here is from Melissa. And I think Melissa was here yesterday at our webinar where we discussed mold and mold toxicity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're saying that between hormones and mold, they're an absolute mess what to start with, mold or hormones. So I would say, Melissa, like mold and mold toxicity will categorically interfere with hormones, right? And then not having sufficient hormones then makes recovering from that a little bit difficult. So there's a chicken and egg, and it's not really a chicken and egg that we can solve over the webinar. What I would encourage, if you want some support, feel free to reach out to us, because any advice we give right now wouldn't be helpful to you because we don't know how old you are, other health conditions, how the mold came to be, all these sorts of things, what your actual hormones are. So if you want to reach out to us, Melissa, at ceo@thednacompany.com. We'll put that email in the chat. We can facilitate getting you into a care stream that will help you identify what to do there, because that's a really chicken and eggy sort of question. And I don't feel like we'd be doing you a favor by trying to address it here without better data. Yeah. So I hope that's helpful, Melissa. All right, Dr. Betty.
Yes.
This is delightful. I always learn so much when I come into these with you, and I'm very grateful for it because I'm grateful for the passion. I don't think there's um sustained or sufficient passion around these sorts of topics, and I'm really grateful what you're offering women, because there's been for so long a loss of information because we intergenerationally didn't talk about it.
Right, right. Yeah, we didn't,
Yeah.
and then a lot of women get gaslit when they do start asking questions.
Yes.
And that's not fair. So I get passionate about it just because I'm like, I just want you to be able to have the answers you need,
Yeah,
and somebody to be able to speak frankly to you about it so you can have informed consent to make the decision. If no one ever
exactly.
talks to you about it, you didn't get informed consent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the goal, right? It's not our job to choose the option. It's our job to tell you what options you have.
Yeah,
All
definitely.
right, Vidal. Well, you are an absolute favorite of this, and I am going to take you up on the offer of one day we're going to sit and we're going to run through all your
Yeah.
genes so that people can. And I think that's an important lesson just in general to hear. If you have a gene, that does not mean your life is going to suck. It just means you might have
No,
chosen a little
that's why
bit.
I'm always like, I need to show mine. I can show mine. I can show, some urinary hormone metabolites. I'm working right now with a lab and hopefully maybe publishing, but maybe bringing some new technology to this world because there's
I
still
love
pieces
it.
missing. So, yeah, it's much needed. But I'd be happy to share mine. I've already shared it as a podcast, so it doesn't bother me a bit.
Amazing. Well, audience, we will definitely let you know when that is going to come to be so that you can kind of hear what it looks like to understand your genes and how that can influence life decisions.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, Catherine, my cat sends her most indifference to you because she's a cat, and so she's grateful for the flowers, though.
Oh yeah, we didn't have the cat butt special. Like how many how many cat butts did we get today?
That is a She Summit special. So, audience, what we do is during She Summits, we enable people to count up the number of times my cat shows her butt on screen, and then you get a prize for it. Because if you have to stare at cat butt, you might as well get something for it. All right, audience, thank you so very much for joining us this evening. It was absolutely delightful to have you here. If you have any feedback, if you want to hear more or less of something, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know. Dr. Murray, as always, we are
Yep.
grateful, and I look forward to when we get to dive into your genes soon.
Yeah, yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Au revoir, mes amis. Au revoir.